The distance between Nadia Sokolov's cabin and her barn was only 70 feet. In summer, a child could run it in seconds. In winter, it could feel longer than a mile. The year after her husband died, Nadia learned that the hard way. 5 times a day, sometimes more, she had to cross that open stretch of yard to keep her family alive. Once for firewood, once for hay, once to milk the cows, then again for more wood, then again because winter is never satisfied with what you have already carried. 70 feet. That was all. 70 feet of open Wyoming wind between the warmth of her cabin and everything her family needed to survive. And in the high, lonely country of the Bighorn Basin, wind could kill you long before the cold ever finished the job. By January, the drifts stood waist-deep against the fence line. The sky stayed white for days at a time. The air cut so hard into the lungs, it felt less like breathing and more like swallowing broken glass. Every time Nadia opened the cabin door, the storm entered with her. It rushed across the floor. It wrapped around the legs of the table. It struck the stove and stole the heat she had spent the last hour making. Her daughter Katya would be left inside by the fire, wrapped in blankets. Her son Petro would pull on his coat and follow her into the yard. Together, they would lower their heads and fight the wind to the barn. Not walking, pushing, leaning forward as if the air itself had turned solid. By the time they reached the barn, their faces would be raw, their eyelashes stiff with frost, their hands clumsy inside wool gloves already wet with blown snow. Then they would gather what they needed: an armload of wood, a bucket of milk, a forkful of hay, and turn back toward the cabin again. The journey home was always worse, because the body loses faith on the return. The body knows exactly how much strength it has already spent. Nadia would shoulder the wood. Petro would carry what he could. And all the while, the wind came at them from the north, straight and merciless, rolling down the basin with nothing to slow it. When they finally stumbled back through the door, gasping and half blind with snow, the cabin would already feel colder than when they had left it. Not because the fire had gone out, because the heat had escaped again. That was the lesson no one in the valley seemed to understand. People talked endlessly about stoves. At the trading post, they argued about oak and pine, about iron fireboxes, about chimney draft and brick thickness, and who had the hottest house in Ten-Sleep. But Nadia had seen enough suffering to know something they did not. A hot fire does not matter if the warmth cannot stay where you need it. Before coming to Wyoming, she had worked as a field medic in places where winter and war often arrived together. She had watched men die from exposure even when blankets were close by. She had learned to study heat the way some people studied blood, how it leaves the hands first, how wind strips it from the face, how a body can spend all its strength simply trying to stay warm. Out there in the basin, she began to understand that her cabin was not failing because the stove was weak. The cabin was failing because its life was scattered. The wood was in the barn. The cows were in the barn. The hay was in the barn. Everything essential to survival lay 70 feet away in the open wind. Every trip outside was like opening a wound. And every time she opened that cabin door, winter took another piece of what the fire had built. Her husband, Yuri, had built the cabin well enough. Tight logs, stone chimney, a cast iron stove that glowed red when fed properly. By frontier standards, it was respectable. It should have been enough. But Yuri had died in the summer of 1910 beneath a falling timber while helping a neighbor bring down trees before the first autumn snows. By the time winter came, Nadia was alone with 2 children and a homestead that suddenly felt too large for one pair of hands. That first winter without him nearly broke them. Not in one dramatic night, not with a single blizzard, but slowly, through repetition, through the exhausting stupidity of doing the same impossible thing over and over because everyone accepted it as normal frontier life. Cross the yard, lose the heat, feed the stove, again, lose the heat again. Wake in the dark to feed the fire because the house had cooled too much while you slept. Stuff rags around the door. Find them frozen stiff by morning. Listen to your daughter coughing beneath blankets. Count the shrinking woodpile. Count the days until spring. By February, Nadia was buying extra firewood on credit. By February, Petro's cheeks were split with windburn. By February, Katya slept in her coat. And by February, Nadia lay awake most nights listening to the gale scrape across the cabin walls, understanding something no one else in the valley seemed willing to say aloud. The enemy was not simply cold air. The enemy was moving cold. Wind. Wind was the thief. It stole heat from skin. It stole heat from walls. It stole heat through every crack around the door, every careless trip across the yard, every moment spent exposing warm bodies and warm rooms to a river of frozen air. That realization stayed with her through March, then through April, then into the dry summer months when the valley looked harmless again and other people forgot what winter had done to them. Nadia did not forget. By August, the idea had begun to take shape in her mind. Not a bigger stove, not thicker walls, not more wood. A covered passage, a protected corridor between the cabin and the barn, a place where the wind could not reach her children. A pocket of still air stretched across the 70 feet winter used to own. When she began building it, people slowed their horses on the county road and stared. They saw a long, ugly frame of scrap timber and saplings rising out of the yard. They saw patched canvas dragged over the top like skin over bones. They saw a widow wasting precious effort on something flimsy and strange. What they did not see was that Nadia Sokolov was not building a tunnel. She was building a way to steal those 70 feet back from winter. The idea did not come from carpentry. It came from memory, from places far colder than Wyoming. From nights Nadia Sokolov had spent in field hospitals where men arrived half frozen, their bodies shaking, their skin already losing color. She had seen what cold could do. But more importantly, she had seen what wind could do. Cold alone slows the body. Wind steals it. It pulls heat from skin faster than the body can replace it. It turns discomfort into danger. And once that process begins, it does not stop. Out on the basin, everyone was trying to fight winter by making more heat. Bigger fires, more wood, hotter stoves. But Nadia understood something they did not. You cannot win by pouring heat into a space that cannot hold it. You have to stop the loss first. That was the idea. Not a stronger house, not a better stove. A barrier, a layer, a space where the air could remain still. In late August, she found what she needed. At the trading post, a notice had been pinned beside the door. A surplus auction from the army post. Among the listed items were heavy canvas tarps once used to cover wagons and equipment. Worn, patched, but strong. Nadia spent what little money she had and bought 2 of the largest sheets. $9. It was the biggest risk she had taken since Yuri died. The rest she gathered herself. Scrap timber from behind the barn, old planks left from the cabin's construction, young pine saplings cut from her own land. Straight, flexible, free. She began in early September. First, she marked the path. A straight line from the cabin door to the barn. 70 feet. The same distance she had crossed all winter. This time, she measured it carefully. Staked it, defined it. Then she dug. Post holes every few feet along both sides of the line. Not deep, but enough to hold weight. Enough to stand against the wind. The work was slow. Her hands blistered again. Petro helped where he could, dragging dirt away in small piles. They worked in silence most days. The kind of silence that comes when a person is building something they cannot afford to get wrong. Into those holes went the posts. Short, solid, low to the ground. This was not a tunnel meant for comfort. It was not meant to stand tall like a building. It only needed to function. Then came the frame. saplings bent and tied into simple arches, a ridgeline running from one end to the other, a skeleton stretching across the yard. From a distance it looked strange, like the spine of some animal half buried in the earth. Neighbors began to notice. Riders slowed on the road. They stared. They whispered. They did not stop. Not at first. By the time Nadia pulled the canvas across the frame, the attention had turned into quiet judgment. The tarps were heavy, stiff. They dragged across the wood with a rough sound that echoed in the still air. It took 3 days to stretch them tight, 3 days to secure every edge, 3 days to turn the skeletal frame into something solid, something enclosed, something different. She overlapped the sheets in the center, layered them for strength, then sealed them. A mixture of oil and tar worked deep into the fabric until it darkened and stiffened. It smelled sharp, unpleasant, but it made the canvas resist water, resist snow, resist the weather that was coming. From the outside, the finished structure looked wrong. Too low, too soft, too temporary. It sagged slightly between the supports. It did not look like something built to survive a Wyoming winter. It looked like something built out of fear. And that is exactly what people began to say. The first to speak openly was Elias Boone, a man who had built half the barns in the valley, a man who understood wood, weight, and winter better than most. He rode up one afternoon and stepped down from his wagon, studying the tunnel with narrowed eyes. He pushed against the canvas, tested the frame, walked its length, then turned back to Nadia. "This won't hold," he said plainly. "First heavy snow, and it'll collapse." Nadia stood on the porch, wiping her hands against her apron. "It's not for the snow," she replied. Boone frowned. "What do you mean?" She looked at the tunnel, then at the open yard beyond it, then back at him. "It's for the wind." He stared at her for a moment, then shook his head. Did not understand. Not yet. To him, it was a roof. To her, it was something else entirely. He climbed back onto his wagon and rode away. And by that evening, the story had already begun to spread across the valley. By the end of September, everyone in the valley had heard about it. They called it different things at first. The canvas tunnel, the widow's passage, that strange thing out on the Sokolov place. But it did not take long for the name to settle into something sharper, something easier to laugh at. The widow's folly. It started at the trading post. It always did. Men leaning against the counter, boots dusty from the road, speaking just loud enough for others to hear. "Boone says it'll fold in the first real snow. Ain't built for Wyoming. Woman's trying to hide from winter." A few chuckles, a few shakes of the head. Then the conversation would move on. but the name stayed. The next Sunday, it reached the church. Women who had once greeted Nadia with quiet kindness now spoke more carefully. Their smiles lingered a moment too long. Their questions sounded softer, but carried something else beneath them. Concern. Or something that looked like concern. "Are you managing all right out there? With the children, I mean. It must be difficult, alone." Nadia answered politely, always the same. "We are managing." But she could feel the shift. People were no longer just curious. They were watching. Some began making small detours on their way home from town, driving their wagons slowly past her land, not stopping, just looking, eyes tracking the long, dark shape stretched between cabin and barn, a structure that did not belong, not in design, not in tradition, not in the way things were supposed to be done. On the frontier, survival depended as much on reputation as it did on skill, and reputation could turn faster than weather. The concern became official in October. Caleb Mercer, the county agent, arrived one afternoon with a notebook in hand. He stood at a careful distance from the tunnel, as though it might collapse if he stepped too close. "Mrs. Sokolov," he began, voice measured, "I've received some reports regarding your construction." Nadia said nothing. He gestured toward the canvas structure. "It connects your dwelling to your barn." "Yes." He made a note. "There are concerns. Concerns about safety, fire risk, structural stability." He glanced again at the tunnel. "And frankly, its purpose." "It is not a dwelling," Nadia said calmly. "It is a passage." Mercer frowned slightly. "A passage to keep you from leaving your home?" "To keep the wind from entering it." He paused at that, long enough to consider, but not long enough to understand. "I will need to file a report," he said finally. Nadia nodded once. "You may write what you like." He left shortly after, but the effect of his visit did not leave with him. 2 weeks later, her brother-in-law arrived. Ivan Petrov rode in just before dusk, his expression already tight with worry. He did not look at the tunnel as he approached the house. He did not need to. He had already heard enough. Inside, he sat at the table without removing his gloves. "Nadia," he said quietly, "this has gone too far." She did not answer. He continued. "It was talk before. People gossip. That happens. But now—" He hesitated, then forced the words out. "They're saying you can't manage the homestead. They're saying you're afraid of the weather." Nadia's eyes did not move. Ivan leaned forward slightly. "They're asking questions." "What kind of questions?" His voice lowered. "The kind that involve your children." The room fell silent. Outside, the wind moved lightly across the dry grass, not yet cold, not yet dangerous, but familiar. They think maybe the children would be better off in town, Yvonne said. With family. With proper supervision. The words hung in the air between them, heavy, unavoidable. This was no longer about a strange structure in the yard. It was about her ability to remain here at all. Nadia looked down at her hands, the skin still rough from weeks of work. Then she looked back up at him. Her voice was quiet, flat, but certain. I am not trying to impress anyone, Yvonne. I am trying to keep my children warm. He said nothing after that. There was nothing he could say, because he did not understand the problem she was solving. He only understood how it looked. By early November, the first cold winds began to move through the basin. Not yet, but enough to remind the valley what was coming. People checked their wood piles, sealed their doors, prepared their stoves. And not one of them believed the widow's canvas tunnel would make any difference at all. Winter did not arrive all at once. It came in layers. The first snow in early December was heavy and wet, the kind that clung to everything, the kind Elias Boone had warned about. It settled on the canvas tunnel slowly at first, then steadily, then all at once. By the second day, the weight began to show. The fabric sagged between the supports. The frame bent slightly under the load. From the road, it looked as if the whole structure might collapse at any moment. People noticed. They watched. They waited. But Nadia Sokolov was already inside the tunnel. She carried a long pole with a crosspiece nailed to the end. A simple tool, nothing more. Standing beneath the canvas, she pushed upward. The snow shifted, then slid, then fell away from the surface in heavy sheets. She moved slowly along the length of the tunnel. Push, slide, push, slide. The structure held, not because it was strong, because it was designed to shed the weight instead of fighting it. The first test passed, but that was not the real test. The real cold came next. December 15th, 22 below. December 19th, 31 below. Then the front moved in from the north. By December 22nd, the temperature dropped to 42 below zero, and it did not rise again, not for days. The wind followed, a constant grinding force that moved across the basin without stopping. 40 miles an hour, 50 at times, a sound that never ended, a pressure that never lifted. At those temperatures, the air stopped feeling like air. It became something else, something that burned, something that punished. Exposed skin froze in minutes. Water turned to ice before it could soak into the ground. Metal snapped. Wood cracked. The valley began to break. In the Boone household, the largest and best-built home in the area, they fed the stove constantly. Armloads of wood every hour. Still, the temperature inside struggled to stay above 45 degrees. They closed off rooms, hung blankets over doorways, moved the children into a single space. At the Garrison place, the situation was worse. Mary Garrison was close to giving birth. Her husband made the trip to the woodpile again and again through the wind, each time returning slower, colder, each time bringing the storm back inside with him. Across the basin, cattle froze where they stood. Barns turned brittle in the cold. Water froze faster than it could be poured. People stopped talking about comfort. They talked about endurance, about getting through the night. And then, people began to notice something strange. It started with a man riding through during a break in the wind. He passed Nadia Sokolov's homestead, expecting to see the same signs as everywhere else. Heavy smoke, constant movement, the urgency of survival. Instead, he saw stillness. A thin, steady line of smoke rising from the chimney. Not thick, not frantic, just steady. The path to the door was clear. The tunnel stood intact. Snow slid off its sides as the wind passed over it. He slowed his horse, looked again. Something about it felt wrong. Or rather, not wrong enough. Later, he would describe what he saw through the front window. Nadia sitting in a chair, a book in her hands, her children on the floor beside her, playing, not huddled, not wrapped in blankets, playing. No coats, no visible panic, no sign of the struggle happening everywhere else. The story spread quickly, too quickly. It didn't make sense, because nothing about that winter should have allowed a small cabin to remain calm, while the rest of the valley was fighting just to stay above freezing. At first, people dismissed it. Then they questioned it. Then they began to watch more closely. And one man finally decided to see it for himself. Elias Boone did not come out of curiosity. He came because he had no better option. On the 16th day of the deep freeze, his supply sled broke through a hard drift less than 200 yards from Nadia Sokolov's cabin. The runners sank deep. The horses struggled. The wind picked up again. At 40 below, a man does not stand still for long. The cold begins to take him piece by piece, fingers first, then face, then thought. Elias had spent his life building structures meant to survive winters like this. Now he stood in the middle of one and realized he might not make it back to his own house. So he did the only thing left to do. He walked toward the place he had already dismissed, the widow's Folly. He knocked once, hard. The door opened, and the first thing that struck him was not what he saw. It was what he felt. Warmth. Not the harsh, choking heat of an overworked stove, not the dry blast of air from a fire pushed too far. Something else, steady, even, calm, like stepping into a different season. He stood there for a moment, unable to move. The blood returning to his face burned like fire. His hands shook as feeling crept back into them. Then he looked past Nadia, into the room. Her children sat on the floor, playing, in their shirt sleeves. No coats, no blankets, no sign of strain. The air inside the cabin did not move. It rested, quiet, still, as if the storm outside had been sealed away. Elias stepped inside slowly, closed the door behind him. The silence was almost as shocking as the warmth. No wind pressing against the walls, no drafts across the floor, only the soft sound of a fire burning at a steady pace. He removed his gloves, held his hands near the stove. It was warm, but not blazing, not the kind of fire needed to fight 40 below. Something was wrong, or something was different. "How much wood are you using?" he asked. Nadia did not hesitate. 3, maybe 4 armloads a day. Elias froze. He was burning 15. Some men in the valley were burning 20 just to keep their homes above freezing. He turned slowly, his eyes scanning the room, looking for the answer. Then he saw it, a thermometer mounted on the far wall. Small, simple, unremarkable. He walked toward it, each step heavy, deliberate. He leaned closer, squinted. The red line was clear, steady, unmoving. 68 degrees. Outside, it was -42, a difference of over 100 degrees. Elias Boone had spent his entire life building against winter, and he had never seen anything like it, not even close. "How?" he said quietly. Nadia did not point to the stove. She did not point to the walls. She turned and looked toward the side door, the one that led into the tunnel. "The wind is the thief," she said. "I have stopped the thief." Elias had to see it. She took a lantern, opened the door. No blast of air hit them, no violent rush of cold, only stillness. Cold, yes, but quiet, controlled. The flame in the lantern did not move. He stepped inside. The tunnel stretched ahead of him, 70 feet. The same distance that had nearly killed him more than once. Now it felt different. The air did not push. It did not bite. It simply existed. They walked the length of it in silence. Snow slid across the outside surface, but none of it entered. No wind reached them. At the barn, he saw her wood pile, still high, barely touched, the animals calm, the space stable. On the way back, he stopped, placed one bare hand against the cabin wall inside the tunnel. Cold, but bearable. Then he stepped outside for just a moment, pressed his hand against the exposed wall facing the wind. The pain was instant, sharp, violent, unforgiving. He pulled his hand back quickly, stepped inside again, and in that moment, he understood. This was not a tunnel. It was armor. It was a barrier against movement, against theft, against the invisible force that had been draining heat from every home in the valley. Elias looked at Nadia, then at her children, then back at the quiet room. "My God," he said softly, "we've been fighting the wrong enemy." Word spread faster than the storm. Men came, then more, walked through the tunnel. They stood inside the cabin. They stared at the thermometer. They counted the wood. And one by one, they stopped laughing. By the next winter, there were more tunnels in the valley. Not pretty, not perfect, but working. Each one built on the same simple truth. You do not survive winter by making more heat. You survive it by refusing to let it be taken.